Well, thank you. I'm going to introduce Terry McDonell. It was a great pleasure for me. Terry's a god in our world, and he grew up in Northern California. He played football at Berkeley, but it being Berkeley, it was probably touch football or something like that.
We were in the street, man.
He was, yeah. He's edited more magazines than most of us have read, and he's won every award that a magazine editor can win. He's edited so many magazines, or worked at them: LA Magazine, San Francisco Magazine, Rocky Mountain Magazine, Sports Afield, Smart, Outside, Rolling Stone, Newsweek, Esquire, Us, and Sports Illustrated. Have I left anything out?
I hope not.
It either says that he, all those magazines either says he's in very high demand or he can't keep a job. Which one is it?
I found that it was just more interesting to keep moving, and I kept having these possibilities in front of me, and I just would jump. It was just so interesting, and there were some misunderstandings along the way too.
What, like some of the, like what misunderstandings?
Well, I was
Just about Jan Wenner or something?
No, I never had any misunderstandings with Jan, but that might have been because I left always early in the tenure before, traditionally things would turn a little bit. But I kept leaving and coming back, and that worked out for both of us.
If you had to be remembered for one magazine, what would it be?
I would hope that it was for Smart, but there's not even a Wikipedia page about that.
Yeah, that's up to you. Yeah.
Well, no, it's a magazine I love the most because I started it. It was mine. Very few meetings.
Appreciate that. Yes.
But I lost it to a Japanese investor and went to Esquire. But I don't think I would have gotten to Esquire without it.
Well, it's funny because Smart was started up in the mid-1980s.
It was the same time as Spy.
Yeah, we met at this Annie Leibovitz photo shoot, and she was shooting this for Vanity Fair, and it was 30 editors who had started magazines in the mid-1980s, and I don't think any of them are still around.
I would have to think that through, but I don't know.
Talk a bit about Jan, who's sort of legendary proprietor and a good friend of both of ours, but you worked for him for a long time and had probably many ups and downs.
I don't know. I never knew anyone who could bring out so much bad feeling and bile almost as Jan. People would say they hated him, and he was so offensive. But if you worked with him and you saw how smart he was, that went a long ways, and I did, and I have a lot of time for him, especially as an editor. And
did he help? I mean, Jan is a great editor himself. Those days when he's in the office, did you learn from him? He's not in that often.
The best thing about my time at every one of his magazines was that he would hire me and then go away, either to the movie business or into politics or whatever. He tells me, more autonomy than anyone who ever worked there. But I would not see him for weeks at a time. And then we would come back and we would review, and there would be he would have some suggestions, and they were always good. I remember one time we were at Rolling Stone. The Rolling Stones, the band, was finishing up one of its world tours, and he wanted to know why I had not put the Stones or some combination of them on the cover 4 issues in a row. And I said, well, I didn't think that would be very smart. And he said, well, I think being rich is smart. It was all about newsstands then, as you know.
I know, yeah. Well, then you went to work for him at Us magazine, which struck me as way out of character for you.
Lipstick. Yeah, but in the middle I had been fired from Esquire. I went to Sports Afield.
Why were you fired from Esquire?
It's a huge publishing mystery.
Okay. Here to solve it, yeah.
I don't know. I didn't listen. I wasn't managing upright.
Yeah.
It's like, anyway, it was no good. But what happened was that Jan had started Men's Journal, and I had experience in men's magazines, and I had started outside for him, basically. So he called me back to do that, and I got out of Hearst. And then came the idea that Us could be a weekly because People was doing so well. And I thought, I can do that. And so I did a prototype, and then I got to do it, and I did it for a couple of years, and it was a lot of fun because it was really a puzzle about what would actually happen if America had a tabloid. And I wanted it to be not mean-spirited, and that seemed to work. That was where Fashion Police first appeared, for example. It was Charlie Learson's idea, but I take credit for it,
This is before Kardashians or anything like that.
Yeah, but what we did was we bought celebrity baby pictures for vast amounts of money.
Really?
Yes, we did. We did. We bought Sharon Stone's.
Pictures of her as a baby or pictures of her baby?
Both.
Okay.
But no, you don't remember. There would be the adorable infant picture.
I didn't read the magazine that closely, but go ahead.
Well, you look at these pictures. You've picked up some interesting shots over time. But anyway, we did that,
Okay.
and that was sort of Kardashian-esque.
I thought you were a great editor at Sports Illustrated. You have a very funny quote in the book about changing a light bulb at Time Incorporated.
Well, I was curious what you thought about that because it was
I loved it.
It's a very old joke.
Yeah.
The joke is that what does it take to change a light bulb at Time Inc.? And the answer is, well, it takes 100 people. It takes one person to change the light bulb and 99 to stand around and talk about how great the old light bulb was.
That's good. I hadn't heard it before. I think it's
Really?
really funny, yeah. So, like, when you were working, what was your, not that you're not working now, but when you were at magazines, what was your average day like? Do you charge out of the house in the morning?
Well, as I got older, I got to work earlier.
Okay.
It's a calculus that you will find when you get a little
Reach
older.
your- Yeah, I'm already there.
Yeah. No, I used to stay out real late and not sleep unless I was down really early, and then I would wake up in the middle of the night and make notes and all that. But by the time I was in my 50s, I guess, I would get up really early and get in there.
What's early?
Get in the office by 7:30.
And you'd go to lunch?
Less and less as I got older. It seemed to be more of a waste of time. It was, it was a tool that you would have to use to, get Alec Baldwin to be on your cover or whatever. But when at Sports Illustrated, I didn't have to do that. And also, I just didn't like doing it after a while.
You drink at lunch when you're in those days?
Only when I was being hired at Time Inc.
That they sort of demanded that in those
Well,
days?
I had 2 martinis with Norman Pearlstein.
Yeah. What are some of the stories you're most proud of over the years?
I like the stuff that we did at Sports Illustrated about performance-enhancing drugs. This would have to do with...
You sort of broke the story, didn't you?
Well, we broke a couple of them. The Alex Rodriguez, not a good fellow. Lance Armstrong, Pinocchio of the absolute first water. He would call up and tell me, he had my cell phone number, and he would call and tell me that the stories were so flawed that if I had any courage and integrity, I would fire that reporter or this reporter or whatever.
Yeah.
And of course, at one point I said, well, you've got to really be straight with me here. You want me to give you this, you want this Sportsman of the Year award, but you've got to tell me you're not doing this. This is too dangerous for everybody. He said, absolutely. Cross his heart.
Well.
Liar.
The things that keep editors, anybody up at night, if you're in the position of buying things, is the ones that got away. So what stories did you pass, or writers that you didn't see that you wished you had not passed on and wish you'd hired?
Boy, that's a very, very long list. A more interesting list for our purposes might be the people that I love but then went to work at Vanity Fair.
Well, we're still solvent.
Well, yeah, but that was the path of the great magazine writer. Wherever they started and winding their way up, they would get through. They would go through Esquire, and then they would light.
Yeah, and first class air travel.
Yeah, it was good.
Okay, well, so we'll come to the book now. It's gotten wonderful reviews. Dwight Garner at the time. Jim Kelly, who's here, gave it a wonderful review. And I've always felt like a Emily Bronte heroine around Terry. He's so manly, and it's like John Wayne. Dwight Garner had a very funny line in his review in the Times. He said the book was sort of covered with a pelt of tawny chest hair. So for Dwight Garner, that's really funny.
Yeah.
So how did this book come about? How you didn't?
Well, let me just say something about that.
The tawny chest hair.
Yeah, it's
graying.
Buff is good,
Yeah.
but the thing about this is, some of the reviews have said, well, there aren't enough women in this book, and that's true, but that's because I never edited women's magazines, and I was never
Us magazine.
Well, yeah, but for a very short time. The great irony of it all was, and I wrote a chapter about this, is that almost at every magazine where I was, the women that I worked with actually ran those magazines in many cases. And I wrote all about that, but he wanted to know more about women writers, and they didn't want to necessarily write what I was assigning at many of those magazines, although I had a lot of great ones. What was that question?
Okay, so how did the book? How did
it come about?
Which I loved it. It struck me as it didn't come about as one seamless batch of writing. That it was vignettes of wanting to capture something and then threading it together. Is that completely wrong?
No, kind of, but it was the mosaic in the sense. I wanted to show myself as a writer. I was ready to do that, I thought. And then I thought, well, I want to write about editing and editing writers, really good writers, and what that was like and what it was like knowing them. And then also, because a lot of them were dead, I wanted to write about that too. So I started making these 3x5 cards, not on, or 8x6 with cards like that. And there they were up on my wall. And when I would finish a chapter, it would open and I would move them around.
How long did this take?
It was very fast, the first 9 months, and then there was another year.
And writing at home or an office?
Yeah,
Or?
home most. Well, I write on the road too. I write wherever I travel. Yeah.
So some of the writers Terry's worked with are Thomas McGuane, Hunter Thompson, Peter Matheson, Kurt Vonnegut, James Salter, Jim Harrison, George Plimpton, and Richard Ford. And a lot of them are of a certain type of writer. And you would develop relationships with them. Who were the two of the more interesting ones you dealt with?
I think the most interesting relationship between writers that I observed was the one between Hunter Thompson and George Plimpton.
I mean, their relationship, or?
Their relationship. I was drawn into that happily, but they had an indelible friendship that I think was based on a mutual recognition that they were both captives in their very different, very unique personas.
Yeah.
And they...
Hunter, what was George Plimpton's, what was he a captive of? So patrician sort of?
Yeah, that whole patrician. He's
seersucker.
not a very good writer. He's sort of lazy, but he's so charming. Let's have a drink with George. He's an after-dinner speaker,
Right.
and he'll try anything. And of course, Hunter was completely wacky, and he was like dangerous. Try anything all the time. But they could be at the same event and have completely different observations about it, and then talk to each other as if they'd had this magical time together and it was all the same. When they met, they were on a Lufthansa flight to the Ali Rumble in the Jungle fight in, I think it was 74, and they were seatmates. And they would talk about this, and Hunter, George would remember that Hunter was worried that he had run too amok on Wild Turkey at a speech at Duke and wasn't going to get paid. And Hunter would say he remembered very well talking about the fine points of boxing, like the professionals they were. And George would say, well, he remembered that Hunter was suggesting that the revolutionaries outside of Kinshasa had developed torpedoes to disrupt the fight. They were going to come down the river. And Hunter said that he remembered George arriving and being treated like a crown prince of the realm by Don King. And then George would say, well, yeah, when he went off, remember going off on a very, very intense 2 weeks of reporting, and Hunter would say, yes, exactly. And George would say, but Hunter spent all his time around the pool smoking hash and in fact missed the fight. But Muhammad Ali loved both of them, and then they had a lot in common. I mean, they were both 6'3½". They both liked to drink.
Both great manners. The thing that people don't know about Hunter Thompson is I always found him just a man of perfect manners.
I think that's exactly right, and it was also true, I think, of he and George, who was impeccable that way, that they were competitive about that. Hunter would try to show George what great manners he had. I remember this when we were together. Hunter would come off at his house in Woody Creek. He'd come off this high stool he had to welcome whoever was coming through the door, a peck on the cheek, a sincere handshake. And George had this manner where he would dip his head slightly when he met, which was very, very flattering. The problem, of course, was they couldn't remember people's names, especially George, so he would be at a party or whatever, and he would see someone coming toward him, and he would know, but he wouldn't know the person's name, and he would say, there's the great man. He said, but I once heard George greet a guy delivering pizza with, there's the great man. Hunter said that was cheating.
You read a lot about voice, which is very important both in a magazine, like a voice of a magazine, like a house style, and also in a writer. Talk about that a bit.
Well, I think I write about voice in the magazine, in the book, in terms of both magazine and writer. At the risk of currying your favor, the idea of voice, the example I always used was Spy. When we met, I knew that Spy had this remarkable voice. You have it now in The Hive, too, in a way. But the voice is really what carries the weight and the personality and the point of view of the magazine and or the writer. So that it's like the way you play it with Trump. I mean, voice is also that you put the worst food in New York, Donald Trump, on the top of your menu. But magazines use voice the same way with headlines and display copy, and I think it's the most important thing, and it's what's missing for most digital properties and .coms now.
You mentioned Trump. You dealt with a lot of them because one of the golf magazines was under your purview.
Correct, and
you rated the golf courses.
It was, yes, we did. We had I think we had the 100 best golf courses in the world, the 20 best new golf courses, best golf courses in America. Donald was extremely interested in these lists. But it was in his attempt to manipulate these lists that I got to know him as the bully that he is. He would just browbeat the report. Well, he would ask them to play golf with him. He would take Time-Inc. executives to play golf, and then he would rail against and complain, and how could it be, and then reimagine what he had actually done, and then finally say, well, I'm pulling all the money out unless
He's advertising money.
Yes, which is the classic quid pro quo that he does not involve himself in.
An editor who used to run the Forbes 400 and worked at Vanity Fair, he said, and he ran it for like a decade, he said that the number one serial caller about the Forbes 400 was Donald Trump. I was always trying to ratchet his number up.
Totally.
There are people who call and try to ratchet their numbers down, but Trump was number one.
Well, the other thing is he cheats at golf.
That does not surprise me.
No, this is funny. Rick Riley, a great sports writer, wrote a book. Some of the pieces appeared in Sports Illustrated. The title is "Who's Your Caddy?" And he played with everybody important, including Trump and Bill Clinton. The only other cheater in the book.
Mulligans everywhere.
Well, yeah, and then there's what was I missed what that hole was. It was back on 3.
Yeah.
That par, not a bogey.
Yeah, sports manners tell you a lot about somebody.
Well,
everything.
How can you cheat at something that's a game that is based on friendship and,
Because you can and you do.
I guess.
You've talked a bit about in the past about some of the mistakes, and one of them was around a story at Esquire with, I think it was Esquire, with Spike Lee.
Yeah, this was awful. Spike had directed Malcolm X, and I had a very strong piece in which he talked about racism as he experienced it and what he thought about many, many, many aspects of Black Power, really, in a way that was very fresh. This was 1992, maybe, and I had a beautiful photograph of him, his arms crossed on the cover, X, and then it's a Spike Lee's Malcolm X. Then inside, a headline I put on that story was by Barbara Grazzuti Harrison. I'll never forget this. The headline I put on it was, Spike Lee hates your cracker ass. And,
This is Esquire Rolling Stone.
Esquire. And I thought it was funny. Naturally, my sub-editors, oh, ho, ho. But then when I saw it in print and when it was too late, I knew it was hate mongering of the worst possible. And I waited, and sure enough, Spike on the phone, and we ran through a declension of why this was a terrible thing to do. And it occurred to me that this one word was the mistake in that. If I had gone with Spike Lee loves your cracker ass, it would have been a huge success.
Oh, sorry.
Nothing except that anything that is not mean-spirited works better than anything that is, I think.
Did you find that stories or headlines or photographs look different at each stage along the way, and you become sort of numb to how they'll eventually look in the printed magazine? That the printed magazine story can appear quite different than the one you worked at on your desk?
Sure, but I was very conscious of modulation all the time, scale shifts and whatever. You wanted the pacing of the book. You wanted big, small, whatever, or big power. You must do that all the time.
I always think if you take a bad picture and blow it up, it becomes a good picture. It's true.
If you can smear a very smart headline across the thing, that's useful, bold.
In your book, you've got this this analogy from Bob Sherrill, who I think got you into magazines.
Well, he's the one who said I should be an editor.
And where was this at the time?
We were at a little startup underground publication in Los Angeles called LA. We were saying it's like the Village Voice except for Los Angeles, which it wasn't, but that's what we said.
Mm-hmm. And he has some Cracker Jack thing that I couldn't make head nor tail of.
Oh, he said that you've always got to, if as an editor, you've got to be giving the reader the pony in the bottom of the Cracker Jack box. It's got to be a surprise. It's like in Cracker Jack boxes where he grew up in North Carolina. The bottom of the Cracker Jack box, there was.
They're same everywhere, I think, but yes.
Well,
okay.
Well, then what don't you understand about that?
Okay, I'm still lost on this analogy.
Well, he also said
Is the Cracker Jack box an article or?
No, the Cracker Jack box is the magazine.
It's the magazine.
And it needs to have surprises in it.
Okay.
Constantly, like Hinkle would say, a bomb in every issue of Rampart.
Right, okay.
Or monkeys jumping out of boxes was another Bob Sherrill thing.
Don't understand that
You
one.
make the box and you want monkeys to jump out of it.
Yeah, okay. Okay. We'll talk about this later. I'll get the lowdown on that.
We should.
I mean, all writers are completely different, obviously, but like, what qualities do the great ones share?
I think, compassion and confidence, and at the same time, a deep insecurity that keeps them going, that keeps them constantly working on.
Why insecurity?
I don't know, but I saw it.
Insecurity in the fear of the reception, or insecurity in the fear that the writing's not good?
I can do better. The writing has to be better. Just has to be better, has to be better, has to be better. They all approached it in different ways, but they all had that.
And it carried their craft, obviously, as well.
Yeah, they would, I once, Jim Salter he would talk about rubbing words together, and each specific word would be so important to him. You didn't dare change a comma. On the other hand, Hunter filed just false lead after false lead, and you would put those together, and that would turn out great. But then when it went over the final thing, he would become like that about the commas. And Jim Harrison once told me, "Well, you've lynched my baby." And this lynching was the result of the insertion of a semicolon. He hated those, as did Kurt Vonnegut, but the semicolon had been inserted in the copy editing thing, and I had missed it and lynched that baby.
It's funny because like somebody like Christopher Hitchens could write a 2,000-word story in an hour, and it's almost perfect. And James Walcott, who I think is one of the great magazine writers and great critics, he spends like time on every single word and writes very, very slowly. And it's funny, the effect to the reader is the same, but the effort that goes behind it is completely different. And sometimes you think that some writers who love writing, it's not that easy on the reader, and the writers who hate writing, it's quite pleasurable for the reader.
I don't think Walcott and Hitchens, one didn't care more than the other.
No?
They just
operated at different speeds.
Yeah, that was, what was it? Gloria Steinem said, I hate writing. I like to have written.
Mm-hmm. I understand that. So would you wish you had become a writer, or are you happy with the career as being an editor?
I never knew exactly that until I wrote this book. And I think that I'm very happy that I was an editor, but I always wrote, and I think that the best editors always write, as you have always done. But I to get out of that conundrum of thinking, I tell a story in the book about Frank DeFord, who is the great Sports Illustrated writer who wrote really about race and human rights as much as he wrote about any basketball game, and the same story. And he had at one point left Sports Illustrated to be the editor of a big national sports magazine. And
the National or something?
Yeah, the National it was called. He'd always not trusted editors, didn't like them. And when he was being inducted into the Time Inc. Hall of Fame, he said that when he admitted that, he said, well, when I was an editor, I realized that I really didn't think very much of that Frank DeFord myself. I hated him.
So I think there have been a number of golden ages of magazines, and I think one of them was probably the 1980s on, and drinking was a big part of that, and drugs. It was for somebody. It wasn't for me, but it was certainly for you people were having more fun than we were.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. I think there's a sadness to that because a lot of people are not with us in a way that they might be now had it not been for that. But at the same time, it was very much of the culture. I was going to say earlier that like George and Hunter, they both hated wine but loved to drink, and they both loved cocaine. George,
I didn't know that about George.
George called it the chemicals, as in, do you have the chemicals? And that fired a lot of stuff. And for a while there, it seemed like that was what everybody did.
Well, you emerged pretty much unscathed.
Well,
or were you the adult not doing this?
The truth is that I was younger.
Yeah.
So I didn't lead any of those parades.
Right.
I sort of rode along.
What would you call the golden age of magazines? Like when? What period?
I don't know, golden night.
If there ever was one.
Well, when I started reading what was just emerging as the new journalism, I just loved every word, every story, everything I read, and that formed me as a magazine editor. And that's where Bob Sherrill suggested that I could become one of those because he thought was good at the story ideas that were a little off-center and recognized what these writers were, and what they all had, again, was voice. They had a unique and distinctive voice individually through that whole set.
If you hadn't been an editor, what would you have been?
A writer. Maybe I would have been in the movie business. I fooled around in there,
television,
TV and stuff. I liked that.
Talk a bit about writing television, for television.
Well, it's like
and why you did it.
I did it for the money to support myself when I was trying to start Smart Magazine, or when I was pressed because I had tuitions or whatever. And I was kind of like a pet because I had this job. So I was the editor of Esquire. I was this journalist, and that was amusing to people who were developing television. And it was sort of like I was sort of paws up and I'm really ready to write a script, and because the money was so good. And then I found it satisfying in a funny way, as long as you don't imagine that you're actually in charge of what's going to happen in the end, unless you're a producer or showrunner. And I probably would have gotten there, but.
I'm not sure you're in charge of being a writer. When Jim and Kelly and I were at Time, and only later did it really strike us. They used to, when you turn in a story, they'd stamp on it writer's version, which I always thought was such a, I realized what a statement that was. It was just, they go through like the moment.
Well, at Miami Vice, we went through colored versions. The first one was white, and then you go to pink, blue, purple, whatever, and by the time you were done, there was no white left in there at all. It was just...
You've given eulogies for Hunter Thompson and Peter Matheson and George Plimpton, and what would be the first 2 or 3 sentences of your obituary? Years from now, I mean.
Dead at 127.
You don't want to live to be 127.
No, well, maybe. You know, there's a reason for those performance-enhancing drugs medically in the end. I don't know. I've been lucky. Had a good time. All those cliches are true, but I am constantly moved by the power of the language and people who can use it to move me. I just love to read, and that's what I love the most.
And where do you think the magazine business is going?
I think you're like Genghis Cook. That would be the last of the Mohegans.
Okay, well, we're trying.
As you know.
We're trying.
No. I don't see a way that the business models will work to support the number of magazines that it did before. And I think the magazines are changing, and I think the high-end luxury stuff will be around for a long time. And as long as the quality's there, they will hold. But, you know, I really miss picking up the checks. I really miss the days when there was so much, and mix was important, and magazines carried, you know, the weight of new ideas throughout the culture. People would wait for them. Now that speed is sentimental.
So where do you see the whole thing in 5 years, say? A vastly different landscape?
Yeah, I think it's going to get faster and faster and faster. I think there will be a big shakeout in news delivery. I think that the magazines that are holding strong now will still be in place then, fulfilling that purpose. But it'd be interesting to see what's going to happen to Vox, for example, or things like their BuzzFeed. You know, where will that go? And the political churn now, there's so much of it. You know, reliable sources. It's like a class you have to take.
These are questions. So thank you. Oh my God, to read these. Okay. We got some questions for the audience. What does it mean to be the editor-in-chief of a publication? Is there a philosophy or principle that guides you?
Well, the cliche is that you work for the reader, and it's your job to present to the reader whatever the mandate is for that particular title. Well, to me, it was always just a great, hilarious honor that allowed you to really fool around. And especially if you were collaborative with the people that you worked with, you could just try things. I put a dog on every page of Sports Afield when I was banished. Sports Afield, I thought, watch this, I'll put a dog on every page. But then everybody said, wow, he put a dog on every page. A great editor. And that
I think you'll be remembered for that.
Well, editor.
I didn't know until now, but now I think
you have to be an editor-in-chief to do that.
Yeah.
So I like that,
Yeah.
as well as serving the reader.
Okay, so a 23-year-old walks into your office and wants to be an editor. What's your advice?
Get to know some other editors. It's about relationships, the editing environment, ecosystem, I think.
What tricks have you learned about spotting a fraud or a liar? Have you ever published a thing like a Stephen Glass situation?
No, but observing that spooked me so bad, And I remember,
Spooked everybody.
well, I think you know, I was at Newsweek when we wanted to publish the Hitler Diaries.
And did.
Well, we didn't really pay for them in the way that we could have. So, but we ran a bunch of it, and we pretended like they were even pretended. We ran it as if it was true, and it was a hoax. And then we compounded that afterwards by writing that, well, it doesn't really matter if the diaries were real or not because of what we learned about. And it was a preposterous position to take, and it was embarrassing. And you can always go deeper when you're checking things, and we just didn't go deep enough.
Okay, this is from Jim Kelly, and I've never been able to understand his handwriting. Have magazines lost their so mart calling? Their
I think he's trying to say romantic calling.
romantic calling. Have magazines lost their romantic calling?
Now I don't know. I don't know.
I don't think they have.
What would be a romantic calling for
It's
a
just a
magazine?
romantic business,
like
you know.
Sports Afield.
No, it could be romantic. No, there's something old-fashioned. Some kid was interviewing me for like a hipster magazine, and he asked me to explain what my day was like and what my job was like, and I told him. He says, "Wow, your job is really retro." I just said, "No, you dick. It's not. It's just the job."
Well.
Yeah, some hipster.
No. But you know what that question should. What that question.
We'll talk to Jim Kelly. Okay.
Well, I will, but I just want to make this point. It's about swagger, and to get your swagger back. That was a compliment that I got once when I was delivering on the I/O at Google. And anyway, swagger is like, I believe. I'm just going to mention this. I remember being at the Waldorf for a National Magazine Awards luncheon. And you ordered pizza from
room service.
From somewhere,
from a local pizzeria.
Yeah, because the
food was so
wasn't
terrible.
right.
Yeah.
That's you don't.
They hated me for that.
I know that, but you don't see a lot of that, and they should hate. Swagger is good.
Yeah, we smuggled sandwiches in from William Pole one year.
William Pole.
We ordered from room service one year. Are you concerned for the future of the National Geographic under Murdoch?
The National Geographic?
Well, they bought their Murdoch.
Oh, the television.
I think did they buy the magazine too?
I thought they bought.
Maybe it's just the television.
I don't know, but I would be. I guess I don't care.
Here's a good. Okay.
I don't think that's the. I don't
That's not
think,
what
I
the
don't
person
think,
was looking for, but
well,
okay. They wanted you to care.
What I mean is the ethics of any place are very important. But the acquisitions of these things is just a movie. It feels like the last 20 minutes of a Monopoly game when everybody's trying to reset where we are.
Yeah.
As soon as that's reset, it'll be time to do battle with all of the digital, vice presidents and whoever that we're going to have to.
Here's a question: what bothers you most about magazine journalism in 2016?
The lack of speed, actually, to be able to anticipate stories coming up so things don't look quite so dated.
I don't know what you mean the lack of speed. Aren't things going
I mean
quickly?
Speed, the lack of being able to anticipate the news cycle so that you're still relevant within the news cycle. But that's only with magazines.
Well, the lack of the magazines have the lack of speed against the internet.
Yeah, unless they have really strong web presence that keeps everything rolling, and you supplement that with the great magazine. But
yeah, weeklies are in
not.
more trouble than monthlies. So
yes, but some do not, and so that would be my answer.
Some do not what?
Do not supplement their magazine-ness with timely, opinionated, swaggering journalism.
But most monthly magazines have to sort of carve out a vision of the world because they can't follow. A monthly magazine isn't about the previous month, the way a weekly magazine is generally about the previous week. You sort of have to carve out your own worldview.
Yes.
What's the worldview of Rolling Stone back in the day and now?
Well, it was going to be, I think it was maybe a little bit different. When I was there, the bottom had fallen out of the music business, so I put politics and art in the front, put music in the back, and
And Michael Douglas a lot, right?
Michael Douglas's
Yeah.
child. That was it.
Michael Douglas was best friends with Jan.
Yeah, he
was on the
was.
cover of a lot.
Well, I like nothing
Yeah,
wrong
he's
with him.
good, yeah.
He's a good. He's a friend of yours.
Yeah.
But the fundamental idea there was that there was a lot that Rolling Stone that rock and roll was about a lot more than the music, and therefore Rolling Stone was about everything that we wanted it to be about, and we landed on politics, and that's what that was. Now it's listier now, if that makes sense to you. Mm-hmm.
If you could own one of the magazines you've edited, what would you own?
I just take Condé Nast, I think.
You didn't work at Condé Nast.
Never. That's my great sadness.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
The two other great magazine empires. Why is that? Why didn't you work at Condé Nast?
I don't know. I tried. I wanted to. When Vanity Fair was first coming back, boy, did I write a letter.
To who?
Cy.
Really?
Yeah.
And what did he say?
Thank you for your interest. No, I was coming from nowhere.
Yeah.
But no one heard. No one had heard of it.
Yeah, everybody wanted to work at
Tina
Vanity Fair
Brown.
those
Who
days.
was that?
Yeah.
So, but and then there we were at that photo shoot.
Yeah. And there's this question here about Kurt Vonnegut. Could you talk about Kurt Vonnegut?
Kurt Vonnegut was my neighbor when I first moved to New York to edit Rolling Stone, and he insisted that the Rolling Stone did not have the balls, more or less, to run his stuff, but then he wouldn't write for it. So what I would do would be I would track him, and I would find that he had given a speech. Then I would get that speech, and I would form that into a story, and then I would go over his house for several hundred drinks, and I would present it to him, and he would say, "Yeah, that will work." And then so that's how I got him to write for Rolling Stone.
What did you think of him as a person?
Thought he was great. He was just so easy, and he could act. He would put himself into a scene to make you sort of go along with what he wanted. My favorite story, indulge me here. I was going to take some Newsweek writers out to dinner after I first got there. They were very suspicious of me. I'd come from Rolling Stone, and I saw him walking up the street on 48th Street, this big sort of lumbering, loose, walk that he had. He was big, good-looking man, bushy. I could just tell by the way he waved that maybe he'd had a drink. And I said, come with me to dinner and show yourself as my friend so that I've edited you. He said, well, sort of. He said, show them that I am an editor to be reckoned with. And he did. And we sat, and they just were in awe of him, of course. And
This is like Esquire or something?
This was a Rolling Stone. He said, they're going to ask me what my favorite, novel is. And anyway, they were very, very respectful and went around the table, and it was painful for him. Where do you write? Well, I write all the time. I'm writing right now, in fact. And then he told a story about how when he had worked briefly at Sports Illustrated, he had a famous story about how he had been assigned a short thing about a horse that had jumped the fence at Aqueduct and run off. And he was supposed to make a funny story about that, and he looked at the typewriter and then left in the typewriter, and he had left it behind forever. The horse jumped over the fucking fence. So he told that story. Pete Axum told this story, and he said he didn't want to hear that story or that he'd ever had anything to do with that. And finally, he just stood up and he said, well, I think you're all moderately gifted, and left.
Well, actually, when you talk about the fact that you've been to so many magazines, and that first day of walking in and knowing the staff is either hates you or is terrified of you, how do you handle something like that?
Well, I never brought anybody with me at first, so I would just try to collaborate my way into the good. But it's still, people trying to separate their disdain for the old and their contempt for the new. It's like a constant.
Would you? I know when I took over Vanity Fair, everybody that couldn't stand me because we'd spent 5 years at Spy, making fun of Vanity Fair, which didn't warm me to the writers and editors there. And I didn't get rid of anybody for 2 years, which may have been too long. Are you the sort that comes in and sort of cleans house in a hurry, or?
Never. No, I did exactly what you. But you remember, you specifically mocked specific writers at Vanity.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, you did.
And editors, actually.
That also.
Yeah.
Little Hef and all
Yeah,
that.
no, and editors at Vanity Fair, yeah.
Yeah.
It was an awkward time. And advertisers, as a matter of fact. So, there's a question here. What do you think of the average reader? I assume you mean a reader, not just an average person. I mean,
a reader who would It depends on what they're reading, I think. There's just
Did you like bumping into your readers?
Sometimes.
Like when?
Plimpton used to say that his highest moment was when he saw Ernest Hemingway buy a copy of the Paris Review in the Ritz Hotel in Paris. And that was the only time he ever saw someone buy the Paris Review. I saw people buy Sports Illustrated over and over. I was on airplanes and somebody next to me would be reading, and sometimes I edit that magazine. They'd go, "Oh yeah, fine." Yeah, good. It wasn't
right.
Just no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't that they didn't believe me. It was that it wasn't. It didn't carry the glamour that the Paris Review did somehow.
Mm-hmm.
It was like in magazine to magazine. At Rolling Stone, people were interested. Mm-hmm. But most of the letters we got at Rolling Stone were from people in prison.
Right.
Which is another.
Really?
Yeah, the letters of the editor.
Yeah, I used to edit the letters at Life magazine, and most were from prison inmates as well, with a lot of time on their hands. Is there any other questions from the audience?
Yeah. Harry, tell us about the effect of poetry on your writing and on your poetry.
I'm a poet.
Ooh, you didn't tell me that. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a book called
No, I'm
Wyoming.
kidding. I knew that, yeah.
I will send you one.
That's good.
I studied poetry in college. It was always very important to me, and I love it, and I read it all the time. And so I would sometimes find people who had been poets before they were novelists, and then call them up and tell them that I knew their poetry, and then ask them to write journalism. And this is one of the ways I went after Jim Harrison, who was a poet starving to death who didn't like anything except poetry. And Tom McGuane suggested to him, he said, "Well, write a novel. You can maybe get $8,000 for it."
I mean, Archibald Cliche, I think, wrote for Fortune at one point. So.
Oh, he edited Fortune.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was
one of the editors. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very. Sorry that. This is nonfiction, but yeah.
Well, no, if you're referring to that Hurt classic, California.
Oh yeah. Sorry, yeah.
They're reissuing it now. Because,
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. I can't hear.
Can you hear me now?
I can't.
I'll translate. Yes,
Okay.
I can hear you. I'm much younger than Terry.
Okay, so here's
So here we go.
You know that I think you're brilliant, Jessica. Okay.
Hi, Jessica.
I just want to make a correction. I'm editing it. That line, I hate writing, but I love having written.
Yeah.
It's Dorothy Parker.
Not
Well-
sure it was her either.
Well,
I think you're both wrong.
Glorious.
Jim, what do you say? I don't think it was Dorothy Parker.
It is Dorothy.
Okay. I think other people have said it as well.
Oh, I hope so, but somebody checked it.
I think Shakespeare said it.
I'm teaching Terry, in fact, because I think that you're a genius.
Well, thank you for pointing out both of those things. Jessica.
Okay, thank you very much. And
Yeah.
Terry?
Thank you, Graydon.
Yeah.